So this is chapter 3 of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance commentary. In chapter 3, they're leaving the Red River Valley and there's a big storm brewing. So they start to race on the motorcycles at very high speeds to get to their motel. And even reading about this is terrifying, for me at least. This describes the looming storm. It seems huge, overpowering. The prairie here is huge, but above it, the hugeness of this ominous gray mass ready to descend is frightening. We are traveling at its mercy now. A flash and ka-wham of thunder, one right on top of the other. That shook me, and Chris has got his head against my back now. A few warning drops of rain. At this speed, they are like needles. A second flash. Wham! And everything brilliant. And then, in the brilliance of the next flash, that farmhouse, that windmill. Oh my God, he's been here. Throttle off. This is his road. A fence and trees. And the speed drops to 70, then 60, then 55, and I hold it there. So whoever he thinks has been there, it rattles him enough to drop from 90 to 55. Speed up, says Chris. No, I shake my head. It's just a feeling. On a cycle, you can trust them, and we stay at 55. The first rain begins now, but up ahead I see lights of a town. I knew it would be there. Then they meet up with John and Sylvia, who are way ahead. John says there is a motel at the other end of town, but I tell him there's a better one if you turn right at a row of cottonwoods a few blocks down. We turn at the cottonwoods and travel a few blocks, and a small motel appears. Inside the office, John looks around and says, "This is a good place. When were you here before?" "I don't remember," I say. "Then how did you know about this?" "Intuition." He looks at Sylvia and shakes his head. Sylvia has been watching me silently for some time. She notices my hands are unsteady as I sign in. "You look awfully pale," she says. "Did that lightning shake you up?" "No." "You look like you'd seen a ghost." Surely the narrator did not just see a ghost. How could he? Ghosts don't exist. So something odd is happening here, and he's setting us up for it. In fact, the word ghost is a harbinger. Later, they're hanging around the motel courtyard, drinking whiskey and letting Chris tell them ghost stories. After a while, he says, "Do you believe in ghosts?" "No," I say. "Why not?" "Because they're unscientific." The way I say this makes John smile. "They contain no matter," I continue, "and have no energy, and therefore, according to the laws of science, do not exist except in people's minds." So that's, I guess, a pretty good way of summarizing the materialistic way of looking at things. The whiskey, the fatigue, and the wind in the trees start mixing in my mind. Of course, I add, the laws of science contain no matter and have no energy either, and therefore do not exist except in people's minds. It's best to be completely scientific about the whole thing and refuse to believe in either ghosts or the laws of science. That way you're safe. And that doesn't leave you much to believe in, but that's scientific too. So I guess a lot of people would say it's true that science doesn't leave you much to believe in. And certainly that is what is contained in much of the dialogue going on today here on YouTube in this particular corner. "I don't know what you're talking about," Chris says. I'm being kind of facetious. Chris gets frustrated when I talk like this, but I don't think it hurts him. One of the kids at YMCA camp says he believes in ghosts. He was just spoofing you. No, he wasn't. He says that when people haven't been buried right, their ghosts come back to haunt people. He really believes in that. He was just spoofing you, I repeat. "What's his name?" Sylvia says. "Tom Whitebear." John and I exchange looks, suddenly recognizing the same thing. "Oh, Indian," he says. I laugh. "I guess I'm going to have to take that back a little," I say. "I was thinking of European ghosts." So one reason I'm mentioning this particular section is in Lila, the whole metaphysics of quality is propelled, you could say, by a hallucinogenic powwow in which the participants have contact with these kind of ghosts that Phaedrus and Lila has on the reservation. And the whole question of how the Plains Indians see reality is a big part of what the metaphysics of quality is trying to uncover. But it's also a segue into what I believe is one of the most important concepts of this book, and that is how we think isn't necessarily in touch with what is real. But this is rather tricky to discuss, and I will actually be making another video about this particular section because serendipitously I found something that helps us to understand this difficult state of affairs we find ourselves in when Pirsig exposes it. So in the other video I'll do the whole excerpt, but I'm still going to do a fair bit of this. I'm still going to excerpt a fair bit of this. My own opinion is that the intellect of modern man isn't that superior. IQs aren't that much different. Those Indians and medieval men were just as intelligent as we are, but the context in which they thought was completely different. Within that context of thought, ghosts and spirits are quite as real as atoms, particles, photons, and quants are to modern man. In that sense, I believe in ghosts. Modern man has his ghosts and spirits too, you know. What? Oh, the laws of physics and logic, the number system, the principle of algebraic substitution. These are ghosts. We just believe in them so thoroughly they seem real. They seem real to me, John says. I don't get it, says Chris. So I go on. For example, it seems completely natural to presume that gravitation and the law of gravitation existed before Isaac Newton. It would sound nutty to think that until the 17th century there was no gravity. Of course. So when did this law start? Has it always existed? John is frowning, wondering what I am getting at. What I'm driving at, I say, is the notion that before the beginning of the earth, before the sun and stars were formed, before the primal generation of anything, the law of gravity existed. Sure. Sitting there, having no mass of its own, no energy of its own. Not in anyone's mind because there wasn't anyone. Not in space because there was no space either. Not anywhere. This law of gravity still existed. Now John seems not so sure. If that law of gravity existed, I say, I honestly don't know what a thing has to do to be non-existent. It seems to me that the law of gravity has passed every test of non-existence there is. You cannot think of a single attribute of non-existence that law of gravity doesn't have, or a single scientific attribute of existence it did have, and yet it is still common sense to believe that it existed. John says, I guess I'll have to think about that. Well, I predict if you think about it long enough, you will find yourself going round and round and round and round until you finally reach only one possible, rational, intelligent conclusion. The law of gravity and gravity itself did not exist before Isaac Newton. No other conclusion makes sense. And what that means, I say before he can interrupt, and what that means is that the law of gravity exists nowhere except in people's heads. It's a ghost. We are all of us very arrogant and conceited about running down other people's ghosts, but just as ignorant and barbaric and superstitious about our own. Now, let me segue a little because that statement also, it kind of illustrates what we do to other people, for example, right now with this political division. We believe our ghosts, we don't believe their ghosts, but they're both ghosts. And I think that this is a very good way of describing this massive communication problem that we tend to have with each other. Why does everybody believe in the law of gravity then? Mass hypnosis, in a very orthodox form known as education. You mean the teacher is hypnotizing the kids into believing the law of gravity? Sure, that's absurd. You've heard of the importance of eye contact in the classroom. Every educationist emphasizes it. No educationist explains it. When you first read this, it sounds like you know, the narrator is sort of one of these conspiracy theorists. We are so conditioned to believe that things like the law of gravity and and numbers and causes and effects are real, and that if we can't measure it, it's not real. So this passage might be hard to swallow for this reason. Not only that he's accusing teachers of behaving like hypnotists, which really sounds a bit daft, but John and Sylvia, who are normal adults of above average intelligence, are having a hard time with it for good reason. Why would we ever question that the discovery of the law of gravity was actually discovery and not an invention? And even if, as I say this, I am really mired in the belief that the law of gravity has always been an existent force in the cosmos. This is the same feeling I had trying to understand Jordan Peterson's explanation of the truth as opposed to Sam Harris's. And you remember those videos, which and Sam Harris's explanation I understood completely. So it's because of the difficulty of this passage I'm actually going to do another video on it later. Most kids think about ghosts, and Chris's interest has been really piqued this evening. Later on in the hotel room. Did you ever know a ghost? Chris asks. I'm half asleep. Chris, I say, I knew a fellow once who spent all his whole life doing nothing but hunting for a ghost, and it was just a waste of time, so go to sleep. I realized my mistake too late. Did he find him? Yes, he found him, Chris. I keep wishing Chris would just listen to the wind and not ask questions. What did he do then? He thrashed him good. Then what? Then he became a ghost himself. Somehow I had thought this was going to put Chris to sleep, but it's not. It's just waking me up. What is his name? No one you know. But what is it? It doesn't matter. Well, what is it anyway? His name, Chris, since it doesn't matter, is Phaedrus, not a name you know. Then Chris asked the obvious. Did you see him on the motorcycle in the storm? What makes you say that? Sylvia said she thought you saw a ghost. And as the story unfolds, certainly we will get to know these ghosts a little better. Phaedrus, of course, is one, as is the one he was chasing. And I like this section because when you think about the way Pirsig wrote, with the note cards, always rearranging them and putting specific subjects on one card and another subject on another, he interrelated all these. He's bringing in everything a ghost is going to be in this one chapter, and it's so subtle and elegant. It's high quality. And you can see how he does it with the cards, culling all that information and just giving you a taste of where Ghost is going to go in each direction. I was going to say, you sure don't sound like anyone else, Chris says. Yes, Chris, I know that, I say, and it's a problem. Well, I imagine it is a problem for someone with an IQ of 175, and this is certainly something I've seen before in my life. Well, I'm not in the gifted category. I'm still a bit of an IQ whisperer, I guess you would say. I've been able to get through to some people, really smart, isolated guys, kind of like Pirsig, have been good friends of mine in my life. And I think it's one of the reasons I went into clinical work, because ignorance is bliss. And having this level of intelligence can be quite troubling. So I hope that made sense, and I'll see you next Sunday for Chapter 4.